Hello and welcome to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast number 76. Firstly, can I apologise for the lateness of the show this week? However, as many of you will know, the lovely Mrs. Theta Sigma has been unwell, and I hope you'll all appreciate that looking after her was my number one priority. We both thank you all for your good wishes, and I'm happy to say that she's feeling much better. Now, in a change to the advertised schedule, I've postponed my reviews of Light at the End and Adventure in Space and Time. Aside from Mrs. T being unwell, work just hasn't allowed me the time to watch and listen to them respectively. So with that in mind, I brought forward a series that I was saving as a lead-in to the 100th show. Over the next 8 weeks, I'll be looking at 4 of Doctor Who's best-known showrunners, 2 from the classic series and 2 from New Who, and 4 of the best-known directors, again split 50-50 between the classic and the new eras of the show. This week we're starting with long-serving producer Barry Letts, but before we do that, we've some New Who to review.
Where the hell have you been?
It's not my fault. I got distracted.
By what?
You could always find something. Come on.
Where are we going?
Into darkness. Welcome to the most dangerous place in the universe.
They're coming! They're coming!
Aristotle! The enemy are right on top of us!
I'm sorry. This is Gun Girl. She's got a gun and she's a girl. This is the sort of boss one. Are you the same one as before?
Yes.
I think he's probably her uncle, but they made that up to pass the time while they were talking. This is Clara, not my assistant. She's some other world.
I'm his carer.
Yeah, my carer. She can, so I don't have to.
Doctor,
Hello again?
will you help me?
We?
A Dalek so damaged it's turned good. Morality has malfunctioned. How do I resist?
So, into the Dalek. We'll find out what you thought a little bit later on, but now it's time for Theta's Thought. Theta's Thought. Theta's Thought. Theta's Thought. Theta's Thought. Into the Dalek opens with another brilliant pre-credit sequence, if a little unbelievable. How is it possible that something with all the firepower of a Dalek ship took so long to destroy the Wasp Delta? It also seems now that the Doctor has an incredible control over the TARDIS, landing around an exploding ship to save Journey's life, as well as being able to land it in a cupboard in Coal Hill School twice. By the way, that has to be some size cupboard to get a full-size police box in it. There's a great scene then between Journey and the Doctor, with him talking her down over the use of her gun, though I'd love to have seen her try and fire it given the TARDIS's state of grace. Getting her to say please like that was brilliant. Capaldi holds his Doctor's character superbly throughout that exchange, yet still gets the message across that manners cost nothing. There are 2 standout lines in that scene, which were both given by Capaldi. The first, when Journey tells the Doctor that her brother has just died, the Doctor replies, "His sister didn't, you're very welcome." And later, when Journey threatens to kill the Doctor, leaving her in charge of his vessel, the Doctor brilliantly responds, "You'd starve to death trying to find the light switch." I love Capaldi's look of utter horror when he realises that Colonel Blue, Journey's uncle, plans to miniaturise him and put him inside the Dalek. Up to this point we've seen a really confident new Doctor, but at this point Capaldi's face said more than 1,000 words ever could. Into the Dalek also saw the introduction of Danny Pink. A new teacher at Coal Hill School, Danny is soon introduced not only as Clara's new love interest, but also an ex-soldier. Now, I've heard a number of people on Facebook and in podcast reviews say that they couldn't understand why Danny was introduced at this point, and that it added nothing to the Dalek storyline that could have waited. I'm not sure I agree. Firstly, we have Clara building a life for herself on Earth, potentially without the Doctor. This gives her consequences when she comes and goes with the Doctor, and also grounds her character that little bit more. As for Danny, well, if you didn't notice it first time round, take the time to re-watch Into the Dalek and note the scene at the end where the Doctor refuses to take Journey with him, saying, "I just wish you hadn't been a soldier." Clearly there's something building here with the Doctor's apparent dislike of soldiers and Clara now dating an ex-soldier. Foundations are being put in place for future storylines, so yes, it may not add anything to the plot of the Dalek story, but it is building for the future. Interestingly, the same people who didn't enjoy the Danny Pink scene, saying they added nothing to the Dalek story, didn't seem to have any problems with Missy greeting Gretchen in heaven, which in itself also adds nothing to the Dalek plot, but is definitely setting something up for later in the series. Interestingly also, just before I sat down for my third viewing of Into the Dalek, I was chatting on Facebook to a friend of mine who said that she didn't think the Doctor and Clara went together. But for me, the scene which cements the Doctor's companionship with Clara is when he picks her up from Coal Hill School. As he tells her there's no such thing as a good Dalek, she immediately turns round and tells him he's being inflexible and even prejudiced. When he asks if he pays her, she tells him he's not her boss, he's one of her hobbies. Clara clearly has the measure of this new Doctor, and as we see later in the episode, she has the measure of him so much to be able to get angry with him and slap him. And she has no trouble putting him in his place. One thing that I noticed in this episode was the reference to breathing, when the team to infiltrate the damaged Dalek were being shrunk. They were instructed to keep breathing. Interestingly, in Deep Breath, during the fight scene towards the end of the episode, there was an instruction to hold your breath. Now, I may be making something out of nothing, but that's twice in 2 shows that breathing has been specifically mentioned. A theme for the future, perhaps? Who knows? In this story we also see a little more of the cold-heartedness of Capaldi's Doctor. At Ross's death the Doctor appears to show no remorse, only some infuriation that the others failed to notice that he'd saved them. This is a very similar reaction to that which he gives Journey in the pre-credit sequence, when she says her brother has just died, and he replies, "His sister didn't, you're very welcome." After the broadcast of Deep Breath, one of my colleagues asked me what I thought. I replied that this was the 6th Doctor done right. Now, before all you Colin Baker fans shoot me down in flames, let me explain what I mean. I've been privileged to meet Colin Baker on a number of occasions at various different conventions, and he is the most wonderful, kind and generous man you could ever hope to meet. But more than that, in my opinion, Colin Baker is a brilliant actor, and was a fantastic Doctor. But sadly, in his first season at least, Baker had to make the best of some incredibly brave but at the same time incredibly inept script writing. So much did John Nathan Turner want a different Doctor that he allowed some truly awful scripts to pass on to the screen. While Colin Baker made the very best of them, fandom just wasn't ready for this over-the-top, brash, heartless Doctor. Today, however, in Capaldi, we have a Doctor that may well appear to be just as heartless as the 6th Doctor, but who has the means in his actions and explanations to justify that, and who in Clara has a moral compass to keep him on track. I'm sure there's lots more that could be said about Into the Dalek, but for now that's all I have to say. I loved this story. There was an air of both Russell T Davies and the classic series about it, and perhaps that's what I liked. A definite 10 out of 10 from me for this story. But what did you think?
Come here, you scrumptious little beauty.
A box?
Doctor, what is it?
I've got mail.
First to feedback was Christine Pyman, who said, "I thought the storyline was too similar to The Invisible Enemy, and the landing in the stomach too reminiscent of the Star Whale episode. I'm not sure why these would be included so early in Capaldi's stories. It felt confusing." Thanks for that, Christine, and I have to admit I hadn't thought of it that way. But there's a degree of truth in what you say, in terms of the similarities of those two scenes. But, in fairness, when a show has nearly 51 years of back history, it's not all that surprising that some scenes are reminiscent of others from the same show. Ian Thomas McLean said, 7 or 8 out of 10. Too rushed, and Danny didn't need to be introduced here. Thanks for sharing, Ian. But I'm wondering if the sense of it being rushed came from the fact that the 3 episodes of Doctor Who prior to this one were all feature length. Time of the Doctor, Day of the Doctor and Deep Breath were all at very least an hour long, whereas Into the Dalek has reverted to the standard series time of just 45 minutes. Renee Kidd, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, commented, I loved it. PCAP's portrayal of the Doctor is spot on. I love that he's really trying to understand what kind of man he really is, and is upset that the Dalek is only focusing on the hatred of the Daleks in him. He wants so much to live up to the name he gave himself, the Doctor. Great thoughts, and thank you for them. I love the way Capaldi's Doctor is shaping up too, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in a more humorous setting in Robot of Sherwood. Paul Blackhurst went on to share his thoughts. I agree with Ian and Renee. Danny didn't seem to be all that interesting, but within seconds Clara's asked him out on a date. Yes, I know there'll be a backstory, but the whole thing was a bit of a waste. The Daleks have said previously that the Doctor would make a good one, and I think it's been proved again in this story. It could have been a lot darker, and when Rusty saw into the Doctor's soul, he saw hate, not beauty, like the Doctor wanted. I think this will show again, as Peter can play to the darker side of the Time Lord. Also a strong 9 out of 10 for me. Also going to mention Missy. She seems to be collecting the bodies whose deaths have been caused by the Doctor. Thanks for that, Paul, and liking your thinking on the Missy matter. It's also been said that because Gretchen sacrificed herself and landed up in heaven, does that mean that Missy is collecting those who sacrificed themselves to save the Doctor and others, thus implying that in Deep Breath Half-Faced Man jumped and wasn't pushed by the Doctor? Finally, Andrew Marmot said, a really strong episode. Whilst the 12th is not quite fully formed, we got a very clear view of the way this Doctor is going to view his universe. It was nice to see how the Doctor's question from the trailer, am I a good man, fitted in. Another strong episode from Jenna Coleman, who gave another good performance as Clara, and makes me think that the change in her working relationship with Capaldi is bringing about the best from her. I'm now off to Pedant's Corner, as I can't agree with Ian and Paul. Now was the perfect time to introduce Danny, in a story where the Doctor refuses to take Journey with him because she was a soldier. It teases of a future tension between the Doctor and Clara regarding Danny, and perhaps this apparently uncompromising man might have to compromise in the future. Now Peter Capaldi. He gave a brilliant performance. There's always a certain level of disjoint after a regeneration, but Capaldi has me convinced that he'll be the best Doctor since the series returned. He feels alien and different, and took the viewer through the whole range of conflicting emotions the Doctor was feeling, and the sense of disappointment and failure the Doctor was feeling at the end was portrayed in the most visceral way. Lastly, Missy. Did she save, collect, restore, whatever she does, only the characters which sacrifice themselves? Did the other Marine who died first get whatevered? If so, that might answer the pushed or jumped question of the half-faced man. Over to you, Mark Gatiss. You've got a tough act to follow. Thanks for all your thoughts, Andrew. And I, like you, think Mark Gatiss has got a massively tough act to follow. So, as promised at the top of the show, I'm starting an 8-part series looking at some of the show's best-known producers and directors. To kick things off, this week we're looking at one of Doctor Who's long-serving producers, Barry Letts. Barry Leopold Letts was a British actor, television director, writer and producer, best known for his work on Doctor Who, and for producing the BBC's Sunday classic drama serials in the late 70s and early 1980s. He was associated with Doctor Who for many years, with active involvement in the television programme from 1967 to 1981, and later contributions to its spin-offs in other media. Letts was born in Leicester, in Leicestershire in England. He was an assistant stage manager at the Theatre Royal in his teens, and took up the job full-time after leaving school. His initial work was as a repertory actor, following his service as a sub-lieutenant in the Royal Navy during the Second World War. He later played one of the leading characters in the Terence Fisher-directed film To the Public Danger, a heartfelt plea against dangerous driving. He also appeared in the highly regarded Ealing Studios productions Scott of the Antarctic and The Cruel Sea, both in supporting roles. From 1950 he appeared in various television productions, including The Avengers and live drama Gunpowder Guy, in which future Doctor actor Patrick Troughton played Guy Fawkes, and Letts a fellow conspirator. He also appeared as Colonel Herncastle in the 1959 television adaptation of Wilkie Collins' novel The Moonstone. Much of this television work was for the BBC, and Letts abandoned acting after completing their director's course in 1967. His early directorial work included episodes of the long-running police drama Z-Cars and soap opera The Newcomers. Letts' first involvement with Doctor Who was in 1967, when he directed the Patrick Troughton serial The Enemy of the World. This was a complex serial to direct, as Troughton played both the Doctor and Mexican dictator Salamander in the same story and sometimes in the same scenes, a rare and demanding directorial requirement for the 1960s. He became the show's producer in 1969, in succession to Derek Sherwin. John Pertwee had just been cast as the Doctor, and Letts' first story as producer was Pertwee's second, Doctor Who and the Silurians, and he remained the producer for the rest of the Pertwee serials, becoming the father figure in the family atmosphere that had developed on the show at the time. It was an exciting era for Doctor Who, with episodes broadcast in colour for the first time, and an improved budget which enabled more location filming and more action sequences that had previously been seen, and he also oversaw the celebrations of the programme's 10th anniversary in 1973. When he was offered the chance to become the producer of the series, Letts asked that he be allowed to direct some of the stories. The BBC agreed to this, and Letts directed several Doctor Who stories during his period as producer: Terror of the Autons, Carnival of Monsters, Planet of the Spiders, and the remaining studio scenes of Inferno after Douglas Camfield had been taken ill. He returned in 1975 to direct The Android Invasion during the era of Philip Hinchcliffe as programme producer. Letts formed a particular partnership with two other contributors to the programme: Terence Dix, who was the script editor on the programme at that time, and Robert Sloman, with whom he contributed 4 stories to the Pertwee era: The Demons, The Time Monster, The Green Death, and Planet of the Spiders. Indeed, he provided an official obituary to Sloman in December 2005. He was still producer when Tom Baker was cast as the 4th Doctor. Letts cast him after the actor was recommended to him by Bill Slater, an experienced director and head of serials at the BBC. After one story with Baker, Robot, he left the position of producer in 1974, having been the longest-serving producer on the programme at that time. In the 1980-81 series, he returned to be executive producer alongside John Nathan Turner. This was for one season between The Leisure Hive and Tom Baker's final story, Legopolis. Letts' return to the programme was because John Nathan Turner had not previously served as a producer, and a restructure of the BBC drama department meant that head of series and serials Graham MacDonald was unable to offer the support that previous producers had received. As it happened, J&T stayed for 9 years, overtaking Letts as the longest-serving producer on Doctor Who. When the programme returned in 2005, Letts was involved in the hectic round of interviews to promote the show, most unusually appearing for a lengthy discussion piece on the Daily Politics show with Andrew Neil. Barry Letts also wrote 2 scripts for 2 radio plays broadcast in the 1990s, The Paradise of Death and The Ghosts of N-Space. He wrote the novelisations of the TV story The Demons, and the radio plays The Paradise of Death and The Ghosts of N-Space. He also wrote 2 original Doctor Who novels published by Doctor Who Books, Deadly Reunion and The Island of Death. Letts' work on the show is inextricably linked with the character of the 3rd Doctor as played by John Pertwee. With the exceptions of The Enemy of the World, Robot and The Android Invasion, and his one season as executive producer in 1980-81, every Doctor Who story regardless of media in which Letts has been involved, whether as producer, director or writer, has involved this version of the character. After leaving Doctor Who, he went back to a mixture of directing and producing at the BBC. He directed numerous serials and series before settling into a role as producer of the BBC's Sunday Classic serials. He oversaw more than 25 serials in this capacity over an 8-year period, including Nicholas Nickleby and Great Expectations. He continued to record commentaries and interviews for DVD releases of his Doctor Who episodes up until his death in 2009. In June 2008 he recorded a long in-vision interview covering his entire career and his Doctor Who years in particular, excerpts of which will continue to be widely used on future DVD releases. His autobiography, Who and Me, was published in November 2009, then released as a talking book on CD, read by Letts himself, and later broadcast on BBC Radio 7. Letts also had taught directing for the BBC at Elstree Studios. Sadly, Letts had suffered from cancer for many years before his death. His wife Muriel had died earlier that year. Letts is survived by his 3 children, Dominic, Crispin and Joanna. Following his death, Tom Baker was interviewed for BBC Radio 4's Last Word to pay tribute. Baker described Letts as the big link in changing my entire life. New Who executive producer Russell T Davies also wrote a personal tribute to Letts in Doctor Who magazine. The November 2009 Doctor Who episode The Waters of Mars was dedicated to his memory. Issue 417 of Doctor Who magazine included a 12-page tribute to Letts and featured contributions from Fraser Hines, Terence Dix, Nicholas Courtney, Graham Harper, Katie Manning, Chris Barry, Elizabeth Sladen and Tom Baker.
Oh, goodbye, my dear chap. I must say I've had the time of my lives.
And that's all for this time. As always, my thanks for listening. And if you have any feedback on the show, I'd love to hear from you at respectthething@hotmail.com or here on Theta Sigma's Doctor Who Facebook page. Next time, in the second of our series of Doctor Who showrunners, I'll be looking at one of Barry Letts' successors in the classic era, Philip Hinchcliffe. Thank you for listening to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all copyright and property of the BBC, and no infringement is intended.